And welcome to this week's IG Live. Today we are talking to author Mónica Mancillas, and she is the author of Mariana and her Familia, The Worry Balloon, How to Speak in Spanglish, as well as the forthcoming Sing It Like Celia and Legends Leyendas. So we're excited to talk to her today and find out more about her books. Remember, if you want to support diverse books, if you're an author, you can submit your book to be reviewed or donate your books, sign up to be a sponsor. There are lots of different ways that you can be involved. So look for that. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here today. I mentioned a few of your books, but if you want to introduce yourself and tell us about what was your journey to becoming an author.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. My journey to becoming an author was a little bit different. I know that a lot of times people spend years in the query trenches, and in a sense, I did in a completely different industry. I moved to LA in my early 20s to become a singer-songwriter, and when those dreams didn't pan out, it was always kind of my next plan was to become a novelist and write the great American novels someday. After my daughter was born, I started reading a lot of children's books, which I think is how a lot of us wind up transitioning into writing for children, and started just having ideas of my own. And because I was no longer working in the music industry, I had this, need to create, and there was this void that needed to be filled. And with a young child, writing a novel is a really difficult task. I mean, kudos to those who do it. But writing in shorter form felt like something that was slightly more attainable. Not that picture books are by any means easy to write. So I, decided, I kept Googling how to become a children's book author, and this organization, SEBWI, kept coming up. So I joined SEBWI in, I think, the summer of 2017. Joined a critique group. I knew nothing about publishing. I was very new to the craft of writing picture books. So I started attending conferences and trying to learn about my craft. I took every opportunity I could to, if there were agent pitch sessions or manuscript critiques, that sort of thing. And I applied for a mentorship with my Los Angeles regional chapter. With Andrea J. Loney, who's an amazing KidLit writer. And I won the mentorship and spent 6 months with her. This was in early 2018. Spent 6 months with her, honing my manuscripts and just learning about the industry and how to get an agent. At our first meeting, the first thing she said is, "Why aren't you on Twitter? I couldn't find you anywhere. You need to be on Twitter." And at the time, Twitter was this vibrant space for the writing community, and it still is to some degree, but we know it's gone through some changes. So I joined Twitter and started learning about pitch events. I participated in DV Pit in October of 2018, and my now agent, Melissa Edwards, liked my pitch for Mariana and her Familia, my debut. So I wound up signing with her. I had started querying 2 weeks prior, so I got extremely lucky with the timing. At the time, I actually did not know about the Own Voices movement because I was so green, and I thought that being Latina was going to work against me, if anything, in the world that we live in. And so I was very grateful to find an agent who was part of this push to diversify the industry. And I wound up selling my debut at auction a couple months later in early 2018.
Wow. I love that. And I love that you had this always had the thread of creativity and expression, but that it got ended up coming in and showing itself in such a different way than maybe you had originally thought of, which is kind of a big pivot, but it's still that same kind of idea of being creative and expressing yourself. And so you were talking about like being a Latina writer and then the Own Voices movement. And I know that maybe you were saying you weren't even really didn't really know about that larger movement. And yet the themes that come out in your book are about identity, culture, among other things. We'll talk a little bit later about, because I know mental health is also a big part of your books. But as far as the identity, a lot of times it's about kids learning how to find their own voice and finding kind of their own mix of cultures and things like that. Why was that so important to you to write about?
Well, you know, I grew up, I think like a lot of people, in this sort of in-between space between different cultures. I was born in Ensenada, Mexico, and we moved here when I was 2 years old. And so I would go back to visit my family regularly, but it was such a different culture, and such a shock to the system in terms of my ability to communicate. And growing up, and even as an adult, I always really struggled with, you know, as a songwriter and a writer and someone who really relies on words and prides myself on being somewhat eloquent and able to communicate. It was always a real source of shame for me that I couldn't speak Spanish as fluently as I could speak in English. Right. And it was always this sort of obstacle for me to feeling like my family could see the full picture of who I was, because I couldn't express myself as I wanted to. And it really wasn't until I started writing picture books and started connecting with other authors, Latina authors, and not even just Latina, but other people who have been raised in two different cultures, that I became aware of the fact that a lot of us sit in this space of being part of more than one culture and longing to identify with our home culture and feeling like we're not quite enough. And so what I want is to give children what I didn't have as a child, which is representation. Mm-hmm. Seeing yourself and your own experience in these books normalizes it. You know, it makes it something that, oh, okay, because in order to write and get a picture book published, or any kind of book, there has to be something in that experience, in that story, that is both unique and universal. So it has to speak to more than just your own experience. And that universality is what I want to pass to children. The idea that whatever your experience is, it's not only normal, but should be celebrated and embraced, and not at all something that you should be ashamed of or struggle with.
Right. I love that message for kids to have. And like you said, it's for that specific situation, but also kind of this more universal message of accepting whatever the situation is that they came from. And I was really interested to find out that you studied anthropology, which I also studied. And I'm just curious how that influenced you in terms of like having an appreciation and maybe more respect for other cultures. Or how do you think that you brought that perspective into your writing?
Oh, yeah. I think anthropology, I mean, I didn't go to school with the determination that I was going to be an anthropologist. It was really, those were the courses that I continually enjoyed. Mm-hmm. And I think what spoke to me about it was the idea that, first of all, I wanted to understand the human experience, how we are the way we are, and why we became the way we are. And which I think is very similar to being a writer. But my biggest takeaway from that experience of studying anthropology was that there is no one human experience. And all of these generalizations and stereotypes that we come up with are so easily refuted. There, you know, very few of us get to really study other cultures in depth and get a glimpse into how different, how really truly varied and diverse the human experience is. And we are so fundamentally shaped by our environment more than anything else. Biology plays a part, yes, but our environment is really what shapes us as human beings. And so I think it's so important as a writer to bring all those different experiences and diversity, you know, of the human experience to light, and really cultivate critical thinking.
Right. Right. And another theme that goes through your books is, as we mentioned, is about mental health. You have the worry balloon, which talks about anxiety. What do you hope that kids take away from reading your books?
Well, anxiety has been a prevalent theme in my life since childhood. I've had family members who have struggled with anxiety, and witnessing it through the lens of a child can be a really frightening experience, whether you're witnessing it in somebody close to you or experiencing it yourself. And so what I want to do in talking about this and being very frank with children about the experience of anxiety or depression is, first of all, to normalize it, to take the teeth out of it, that yes, it's a frightening experience, but it's also a very human experience. And there's a spectrum. Some people, have more severe experiences, or more, what feels like bigger experiences with anxiety, and others smaller. It takes shape differently, but we all experience it. Nobody is completely free of anxiety at some point in their life. So I wanted to normalize it and give children the vocabulary to talk about it, and also to give them tools to manage that anxiety, and to have the knowledge that yes, anxiety may be a part of my life at some point, but there are concrete ways that I can navigate those experiences and come out okay on the other side.
Yeah, you've said that you want children to understand how to express themselves and the beauty of being able to do that without limitations. And how do books like yours encourage children to do that?
Well, I think How to Speak in Spanglish, which came out this summer, is a perfect example of what I was saying. That again, I grew up with this real sense of stigmatization over the way that I spoke Spanish, and when I was young, I would make mistakes, like I would call socks saquetines, because they're calcetines in Spanish and socks in English. There's a scene in Mariana where that was based on my experience, where I would accidentally call my abuelita agualita, which agua means water. Things like that just felt so embarrassing and crushing to me at the time, which of course now I can look back on and think that's really cute. But in coming up with the concept for this book, it was the first time that I really started, thinking about code switching and how language evolves in different ways in everybody's life. And, there are so many people, whether you speak Spanish in English or Japanese in English or Chinese and French, there are children all over the world who are growing up code switching. And there really is no need to put any kind of shame association with that. There's a real push in our society in particular to get dual language programs out of the school systems, and to push children to only speak English or only speak Spanish or whatever languages they happen to speak. And what I'm trying to push back against that, and kind of celebrate the idea that first of all, speaking more than one language is an amazing thing. And in other parts of the world, that is celebrated and encouraged. It's good for our cognitive development. It's good for our brains. And whatever method a child uses to express themselves should be embraced and celebrated.
Right. Right, definitely. And I think one of the other things I got out of that book was that it was the child leading the adults in a lot of ways, and which I think is a really empowering message to give kids. And I know you said you want to change the world one reader at a time. Why are books such an important way in making a difference in the world, teaching the next generation, have kids that are grounded and confident and empathetic? Why are books such a powerful tool to do that?
Well, as others have said, books really can serve as mirrors, windows, and doors. It's picking up a book. There's nothing like picking up a book where I see my own experience. At every stage of life, whatever stage of life I happen to be at, seeing myself reflected in a book makes me feel seen, makes me feel not so alone. Seeing other experiences that are foreign to me in a book helps me, again, to think critically about the world that I live in, mm-hmm. and to develop a sense of compassion and empathy for the experiences of others that I may not have lived. Mm-hmm. So I think books are one of the most important things that have come out of the human experience, and the more that we the more that we give our kids and the more diverse their reading list, the better off for them and society as a whole.
Yeah, and we've talked about how you initially thought you were going to write a novel for grown-ups and then kind of switched to picture books. But now I also know you have a middle grade novel coming out, and I've heard that you're working on more. So tell me about, what was that like? Was it, originally I thought maybe this was going to be a big leap for you, but maybe not so much if you were starting out writing for an older audience. Is that kind of how has that shift been for you to write for a different age group?
Well, in a way, it felt like coming home because, again, it had always been my dream to be a novelist. However, I did not read a lot of middle grade as a kid. We didn't have middle grade in my house. My parents didn't have the time to take me to the library or buy me things. So I skipped from picture books straight into adult literature. So I definitely had to start reading a lot of contemporary middle grade books, and, just to transition to the middle grade voice. Mm-hmm. But it also helps that I have a 10-year-old child in the house. And so I, am up on the lingo and the thinking and the cultural experience, because of course my middle grade experience is not the same as my daughter's. I mean, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have TikTok and memes, and the language and the lexicon has changed completely. So I definitely had to catch up in that regard.
Can you tell us a little bit about the books that are coming out?
Yeah, so the book that comes out next year is Sing It Like Celia, and it is about a 12-year-old girl who her mom winds up disappearing under mysterious circumstances one night. And so she winds up having to live with her father, who is a traveling investigative journalist. And they're somewhat estranged because, her parents divorced when she was young. And so there's this, period of transition when she's trying to, first of all, live with this, what happened to my mother? Why did my mother leave? And having to adjust to having this different kind of relationship with her father than she's used to. And it's largely inspired by my experience as a child in being a child of divorce, and also my younger sister's experience of her mom disappearing under very similar situation. And I'm not going to give away what exactly happened to the mother. But it's really a book about there's a theme of family separation. There's an immigrant story in here as well. The mother is being detained and her children have to deal with that separation, and just how we go through these trials, and how we, in this case, literally, she's a musician and a singer, and so she finds her voice both literally and figuratively. It's also kind of a tribute to my love of salsa. Celia Cruz was one of the first concerts I went to as a kid, and I love salsa. So that's coming out next year. I have an unannounced title coming out at the end of next year as well, that's sort of an enemies to lovers rom-com for middle graders. Nice. And I'm working on another unannounced title that is a dystopian middle grade about a world run by children. Grown-ups are not allowed.
Interesting. Well, I can't wait for that. And when we see them, we will make sure to share that on our stories as well. And thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. It was such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And for anybody who joined us late, this will be up in just a few minutes on Instagram and later on our YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.